Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's another very interesting day in South African politics. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Do you know that only 40% of my audience is actually subscribed to the channel? Hit the bell icon, subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So let's get on to the main stories of today. And this is the first news story, that the EFF has accused the Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber acting as a tin pot dictatorship after his department, Home Affairs, moved to withdraw travel documents from convicted criminals like the Gupta Brothers. Now, it's very interesting that the tin pot organization known as the EFF, who knows everything about dictatorships, also suggested why hadn't Leon refused travel documents to all of, the white genocide myth people. They said, well, you should be able to stop them from leaving the country and going abroad and talking smack to people. And so Leon hit back and said, well, enforcing laws, laws, those things that like a normal state have, well, apparently that's not authoritarian. It's what proper states do. Like proper states, like Britain, that denied the EFF access to Britain because of the very negative things that they generally tend to say. That any country that's not a banana republic generally would look at and say, that's not a very good thing to say. I don't know, like slitting the throat to whiteness or kill the Boer. Those things, like normal, non-retarded things. But the EFF don't understand. They say that they think that South Africa is a banana republic and that even criminals should get VIP treatment. That's the EFF for you. So they are crying foul whilst worried about losing special privileges. Yeah, it's like weird. Anyway, it's nice to see the DA actually trying to stick up for the rule of law rather than just, supporting the ANC. Talking of which, the DA has actually said to the ANC that they want to make it clear where they sit in terms of the GNU, because according to the DA, they're not there to prop up the ANC, they're there to save the country. And to this, I would say, DA, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, because so far that's exactly what you've done. You've propped up one of the most radical presidents South Africa's ever have. Let us not forget that you went abroad, South Africa was asked about its racist policies, the leader of the DA sat there and said, it's not that bad. And then when the president came back and he was challenged by Corne Mulder on his position on BEE, he basically said, we're going to double down on all of it and all you white people can do one. So yeah, it sounds very much like that's exactly what you're doing. Like you're exactly propping up the ANC. Now, the DA federal chairman, Arvin Meyer, said that they're there to support good policy. You mean like the Benno Bill, bud? The Benno Bill? That's like still happening anyway. And they will oppose ANC corruption, cater deployment, and state abuse, even though there's still tons of ANC corruption right now going on everywhere. Cater deployments is still very much a feature of the state. The state abuse is still very much right there for all of us to see. So apparently the ANC wants unity, and the DA says they want integrity. But I must say that at the moment, as of right now, I'm not really seeing integrity or unity from either party. That's to both of them. Now, this becomes very interesting because the news came out that according to a Social Research Foundation review of the polls, the polls, you can't really take these things too seriously. Like polls move all the time. But according to the latest polls, the ANC has actually gone back up to 40% in terms of its support. Now, the reason that the ANC have gone back up in terms of its support is because according to the people polled, the DA have basically done nothing. So the DA support has slightly gone up, although we'll see what happens in the next elections, because by all imaginations, the DA are on track to lose quite a bit of support. This, I mean specifically the local government elections, where in some areas we're actually expecting to see a huge PA increase in voter support. But in any case, the reason that many people are saying that they haven't all just flocked to the DA en masse is because the DA are silent and are basically just going along with everything the ANC is saying, and are nowhere to be seen. So effectively, they're no longer the opposition. They're in power, and they're very silent whilst in power. And so everything that they're doing, whether positive or not, seems to be being ascribed to the ANC, and is actually propping up the ANC support. So yeah, nice of you to say, DA, that you're not there to prop up the ANC, because that's not what you do. You're propping up the ANC. And okay, so let's move on. Talking of shooting yourself in the foot, which is exactly what the DA is doing. An article came out in Business Tech written by Mike Schudler, an economist, which says that South Africa is effectively undermining its own economic prospects. In other words, it's effectively shooting yourself in the foot. And it says that the reason we have dysfunction in the state is power outages, dysfunctional logistics systems, and policy instability, and it's all eroding investor confidence. Now, to you and me, who sees this on a daily basis, we'd say, well, this isn't news. This is like an obituary which we see every single day. How are you telling us something we don't already know? And the reality is that when it comes through to investors, sometimes the investors don't see the lived reality. They just want to see balance sheets. But now the balance sheets are incredibly negative. So they're having to see these negative balance sheets with very negative outlooks, and they've got to start asking the questions as to why. In typical fashion, everybody's highlighting Eskom, Transnet, government policy. But you see, the thing that gets said in this article, which I had to roll my eyes at, was that they were cited as being deliberate acts of self-sabotage. And one has to ask the question, dude, have you been living here? Anthea Jeffries have written whole books on why this was all self-sabotaging and why it was deliberate. So the fact that you're now questioning the deliberation of it is get with the times, buddy, get with the times. So the individual goes on and says, you see, what's actually happening now in South Africa is that the private sector is stepping in to fix what the state have broken. But it's not enough. It's not enough to stop the bleed. And so what we're finding in South Africa, according to him, is that we're not just collapsing. It's not just that things are degrading. It's us actually putting the trigger on ourselves and then blaming the gun for shooting us, even though we pulled the trigger. It's really, really stupid. But in many instances, it might be stupid. But we have to now get to the point where we also have to say it's deliberate. This is no longer accidental. It's deliberate. And so the question to many is, why is it deliberate? And the answer is actually a hell of a lot easier to understand than you might think. And really it just comes down to the ideas of self-enrichment and the lack of accountability. Remember, if the state is inept and is broken, I can't ever actually be held accountable for the things that I do. And if the state is easy to loot because there's no checks and balances, then it's very easy to steal from the state. Yes, okay, everybody else gets to live in a shithole and everything else goes to pot. But hey, who cares? Because I've got a Ferrari and Jack Daniels, so who cares? In any case, talking of who cares, well, actually, one former minister does care, and that's because the Showmax documentary called Untitled shows his lavish lifestyle, sex scandals, and his political downfall. And he says, this is outrageous, you've just put everything on display for everybody to see. And he highlights it as being character assassination that will damage his reputation and legacy. And to that I would say, dude, you're a former ANC member. What reputation and legacy? Every single ANC member will go down in history as nothing more than a looter and a corrupt individual. That's it. I challenge you to say otherwise. History will write books about the ANC talking about how the ANC basically had corruption or fast track. These people are never going to be able to outrun this legacy ever. And I challenge anybody to tell me otherwise. But in any case, it's very amusing that the individual talks about his reputation when basically having Gupta ties, dodgy travel expenses, dodgy leadership. And so it reminds me that this is exactly where we are in terms of the ANC. They want the lifestyle, but they don't want the accountability. And that's exactly what I was referring to. When you collapse the state, you basically can't be accountable for things because who's going to hold you accountable? Now, this actually reminds me of the next news article, and this is that South Africa is becoming a cashless society. But it's not becoming a cashless society because of WEF propaganda or worldwide whatever. there's a reason South Africa is becoming a cashless society, moving more towards card, EFT, mobile payments, specifically amongst younger people and urban consumers. And the reason for this is actually very easy, and it really only comes down to 3 points. Number one is crime. When you have a digital form of currency, it's harder to commit crimes on it. It's not impossible, but it's harder. In many areas, accessing ATMs is actually very difficult. I know where I live, getting an ATM is pretty difficult at points. But it's not just the difficulty of getting the ATM, it's also the lack of safety when going there. You know that when you go draw money from a wall, it's like you're looking around quite a bit and you're thinking, who's going to come rob me? Also have problems with infrastructure decay. In that in many instances, you can't just put an ATM on a high street because they'll get stolen. I mean, not just the high street. I mean, the ATM will get pulled out the store, out the wall, and they'll steal the ATM with the cash inside. So it makes sense to a large degree with many consumers going cashless, but it also makes sense now for vendors and informal traders to go digital. And the reason for that is because it makes them a harder target in terms of robbing. If you go to the store and you rob them, they got no cash, well, there's nothing to steal. But there is still the need or the requirement in the informal sector to pay on a cashless, because cash, while still being risky to hold, is still king when it comes through to tax avoidance, which, let's be honest, the informal sector is very good at avoiding tax. So do let me know what you think of that in the comments section below. And on to a final news story today, and this is like my favorite news story of the hour. And this is the news story that apparently South Africa faces a tide of immigration, especially amongst high-skilled professionals and middle class. And I'm so bored of reading these articles now that I'm like, dude, why do you keep writing these things? And the actual reason is that a lot of these articles get written by people who specialize in, would you know it, immigration. So basically it's an ad. It's an ad put forward as an article. But in any case, what did the actual article had to say? And it says, well, the tax base is shrinking whilst poverty and welfare dependency grows. And what's causing this? Political uncertainty, crime, economic decline, and racial policy backlash, which are all driving the brain drain. And experts warn that if the government doesn't reverse course, we'll have a country of dependencies with no one left to pay the bills. And this is all true. But you see, there are certain things that these individuals are very conveniently forgetting to say. And that is that in the modern world, people are nothing more than a commodity. And they're a commodity by most states to be traded with and to be used as basically capital. And when you have people as a commodity, that commodity can be capitalized and it can be traded internationally, which means that people in terms of the global market will compete for that resource. And so when you have an engineer and everybody wants an engineer, well, the whole world's going to compete for the engineer, and the best salary is ultimately going to win. And the reality is that the best salary is not in South Africa. Quite often it may be abroad. Now, that's not taking into account cost of living, lifestyle changes, lack of family, cultural identity, because you see, those issues don't really make sense. They don't apply to an individual who wants to do nothing more than commoditize themselves, turn themselves into an economic commodity. Those aren't economic indicators. They're social constructs. They're things that give meaning to life, a quality of life, if you will. And in a global world where everybody's just become commoditized, they've just become an object to trade, then it makes sense that we're going to have a brain drain. Because the countries with the greater capital are going to buy our assets, our people with a brain cell that have an education. So yes, this will lead to a shrinking tax base, to poverty, welfare dependency, and what. But I think it's important to understand that in a global world where people have become commoditized, this is the inevitable outcome. Yes, South Africa is a failing infrastructure. Yes, it is a failed state. Yes, there are crime. Yeah, there's lack of opportunities and what. But really what we're seeing here is the lack of purchasing power. The fact that South Africa's economy hasn't grown enough that a purchasing power can compete with other nations. That's really what's going on here. But we're not talking about that. And it's a shame, because that's the real story. At least that's my opinion. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, Bye.